everyone, my name's Andre, better known as HumaNature, and welcome to my masterclass for the 174 Production Marathon. So yeah, let's not waste any time here. Let's get right into it. So the track that I'm going to be showing you guys how to create is this one right here. Okay, so there's just a short clip of the track that I'm going to show you guys how to create. Now, to make this work within this 1 hour that I'm going to spend with you guys, I have already arranged the samples on the side, and I'll just show you from the beginning how to construct it. Also, I'll show you where I got the samples from and how you guys could, go through and do something with this technique on your own. So I'm sure most of you have heard of websites like Splice or loopcloud.com. If you haven't heard of Splice before, it is a cloud-based sample website where you can access many different sounds. It's really cool because you can literally view it, by the types of samples. As an example, I can come here, I can click on keys, all keys samples. And really, the magic behind it is I can click here on key, and I can see, what key that I want to search the sample in. So you're going to see how this is going to tie in later when I show you a specific technique that we can implement to really make this easy for us to create music fast. Okay, so I've went through and I started with a piano sample. I found something that I thought sounded cool, and then I just started building off of that. So I'll set this off the side and let's delete this and just start from the top. So we'll start by choosing the piano sample. And again, this was a sample that I found on Splice. It's royalty free. Anyone can use it in any productions. And this is what it sounds like, yeah? So the sample's perfect, just the way it is. Other than the BPM that needs to be changed, I'm just going to use it just as it is because it's already doing what I want it to do, so I don't really need to change it. We will EQ it a little bit just to get some frequencies out of it. But yeah, let's just jump into this. So I'm going to double click on the sample and I'm going to change the time stretching mode to E3 generic. This way it preserves the original pitch when I time stretch it. So I need to make sure that it's a perfect 8-bar loop. That way the transients of the sound match with the grid of our track. It's really important to keep everything in time. Okay. So I'm going to time stretch this. So it's an 8-bar loop. Now we can see that the transients are perfectly on time. So now that we have a melody going, and usually I like to start with some type of vibe, just some type of melodic sample that sounds good to me, so I can start layering drums into it. You know, a lot of people start with their drums. I've heard this many times, but personally I like to start with some type of vibe, just some type of melodic element, so I know how I can build my drums around that. So I'm going to be using a series of different breaks. Most of these breaks are out of my own sample pack, which are, you know, drums that I've resampled, processed in my own way, just a collection of sounds that I've developed. And we can start by throwing in the drums that I chose. I'm going to also slice these into the 8-bar loop. Now we'll start with this drums. Okay, it's just a simple drum break. And I'm going to layer in a few more breaks here. Now I'm going to explain these different layers in just a second. I'm just choosing the drums. So this drum break needs to be time stretched. So again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to change the mode to E3 generic so it preserves the original pitch. And then I'm going to stretch it to a 4-bar loop here. And it has this sound at the end. I'm not digging that, so I'm just going to remove that. And actually, I'm just noticing now that the sample, at the very beginning, there's the open hi-hat, so I don't want that happening at every bar. I'm just going to resample this like this. So the open hi-hat is only at the beginning of the 8-bar loop. I'm going to bring in a kick and a snare and some hi-hats. So I'm going to time stretch the hi-hats, just the same way I've been time stretching the other samples. And the kick and the snare, I'm going to match it to where the kick is in the breaks. It's really important that when we bring in a kick, that it's matching the programming of the sequence in the drums of the drum breaks. Same thing with the snare. Okay, so to break down these different layers of drums and to explain why I chose these, I'll just play them one at a time. Just pull this up here. So I start with this break, and this is a break that I've already pre-processed. I have put a high pass on it to remove all of the low frequencies. And really, my goal with this drum break was just to capture a shuffle that I can layer into my drums. And now, this one here, I chose this drum break because, you know, it doesn't have very low frequencies, but it has a stronger frequency response on the mid-range. So, as you can see here on the spectrum analyzer, it has a stronger response on the mid-range in comparison with our first break. And this is so when they layer together, it just helps the drum sound a bit more full, okay? Now I have this drum loop down here. Just to layer those frequencies a bit more. also to add a bit more texture to the drums. And then we have our final layer, which is the splash. Okay, and this, basically the splash, as you can see here on the frequency analyzer, it's just a drum break that are very high frequencies. Usually I'll even do some type of stereo effect on this just to widen it on the frequency spectrum to help add a three-dimensional feeling to my drums. But we'll get into that once I get onto some processing. So this is one of my kicks that I use in many of my tracks. Okay, it's just a kick, has a very good low frequency response, and here is some type of snare clap sound. And yeah, when you bring them together now, we have this drum break. So I'm just gonna route these to their respective channels on the mixer so we can get into some processing. Now, I think it's really important that you kind of mix as you go when you're creating a track, not to get lost in too much details, because then that'll really interrupt your creative workflow. But it's definitely important to keep your track organized and just to know where you are at all times. So I'm just going to route these through. Now I'll call this break 3. Splash. Okay, so what we'll do here is I'm going to create this into a 16-bar loop. Now I like to produce in 16-bar loops because this is a phrase. Okay, if any of you are DJs, you'll know what I mean when I say a phrase. Okay, so I like to create my tracks phrase by phrase, which are 16-bar loops. So we're going to create a progression here in the drums, and that's going to be for the second phrase. We're just going to add a shaker. Okay. Yeah, save, huh? So I have here this bongo layer. Just gonna normalize that, and I'm gonna include this in our drums as well. But I'm gonna include this in a different phrase. But we'll just leave that on the side for later. So just gonna quickly route all of our sounds on the mixer again. Put these hats on the hat. Flashing the cymbals, and this drum break there, called this break 3. So just to quickly touch up on the mixer for all of you beginners. Now it's, I have a template that I've created, and basically what you're looking at here is I just have my drums all routed together to one master drum group, and then also I have my bass. And here you see fills, but this is drum fills. And basically, I have this template because this is something that's going to be consistent through any track that you produce. Okay, you're always going to have drums, you're always going to have bass. So, this template just saves me a bunch of time because I have all my drums already routed together to a drums bus, which a bus is another name for a group. So I have, all my drums grouped together, and I have some bass channels grouped together as well. So that's what you see here. Now, I'm just going to keep on routing the sounds. So I'm going to put the shaker on perk 1. Let's call that shaker. And I'll route the piano to an empty channel. So if we look at the mixer now, we have everything. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to give all the sounds a little bit of headroom so we can process them, and so they're not all distorted. So I'm just going to go by highlighting all the sounds. I'm just going to give it about down to -6, okay? just to give them some headroom, because now I can start processing them to make them stronger. So, okay, yeah, with the red on the master, right now, I'm not going to pay attention to that, okay? You know, earlier I said to mix as you go, but we don't really want to get too technical into the mixing, or else it's going to start interrupting our creative workflow, okay? So, you know, I do little bits of things like routing the sounds to the mixer, giving them some headroom, maybe doing really minor EQing, just minor processing, just to shape it to the way that I want it to be, so I can continue to get through the track. But, you know, really to get super detailed with the mixdown, I do that at the very end. You know, I could put a limiter on the master and just to cap it, but even though it's peaking, it still doesn't distort. Only if it's really clipping a lot, then it'll distort. But just the way it is right now, it's not distorting, so that's fine. Yeah, I can set my mic louder. Can you hear me now? Can you guys hear me better? Okay, cool. All right. So now that I have these drums laid out, I'm going to go back. Just bear with me. Just a second. Okay. So I'm going to get into some processing now. All right. Now I'm going to solo each sound, and I'll just process them a little bit. So I'm going to start with my kick, and you know, I have a simple step-by-step processing chain that I like to use on all of my drums. And again, this is just, you know, through the phase one of mixing, I'll call it. You know, phase one is mixing long you go, and then I'll say phase two is the final mixdown. So for phase one mixing, I just use a simple step-by-step processing chain just to help make my sounds louder, okay? And they will start with an EQ. That's usually the first effects on my chain. And, you know, because I've already pre-processed this kick, I don't have to EQ it. Also, usually I use EQing just for cleaning up a sound. So since this is a kick and I need the low frequencies, it doesn't have any, you know, annoying high frequencies or anything like that. So I'm actually, I don't have to EQ this kick, okay? So we're just gonna skip right to step number 2 in the processing chain. So what I would do after an EQ is I would put on some distortion. Now, the type of distortion I want to use is saturation. And really all saturation does is it boosts the harmonics in your sound. So FL has a native plugin called Fruity Wave Shaper. That's really good. It's really low CPU processing, and it has a really nice algorithm behind it. It really does some nice magic to the sound. But I will use Isotope Crash 2. Okay. If you guys don't know what this plugin is, this is just a multi-band compression plugin. And it has a really good distortion on it. You just close that preset manager, click on the saturate, and then tape saturation. Really helps. Okay, we can adjust the drive if we need. And again, I'll show you with the Fruity Wave Shaper as well. You just bring up this curve, and this adds the saturation. So I'm just going to pop on my headphones really quick, just so I can really analyze. Okay, I'll go with that Fruity Wave Shaper. Now, again, these sounds are already pre-processed, so I can't distort them too much, or else they're gonna clip and just get all, you know, all distorted. And that's really not what we're trying to achieve when we're distorting our drums. We just add the saturation to slightly saturate them, just to make them stronger and to bring them out. So after the saturation, the next step is I'll do some transient processing, okay? And I'll use this plugin by Native Instruments called Transient Master. And I really like this plugin because, you know, it only has these 3 knobs. And I really like these simple plugins. It just has the attack, the sustain, and the gain. I will leave the limit on the gain just so it doesn't clip. And really all we're gonna edit here is the attack and the sustain. Now, for you beginners that don't know what a transient is, really all a transient is, it's this part of the waveform. Okay, it's this peak in the waveform. You see, like the kick or the snare, it kind of creates this triangle, right here. This is the transient. It's from the loudest part of the sound wave until the end. And really, when you see the attack and the sustain, with the attack, all it's doing is it's boosting the initial punch of the sound. Well, you can boost it or you can reduce it. And then the sustain, it's reducing the overall decay of the sound. So as an example, if I were to reduce the sustain of a sound, it would change the waveform like this. It would tighten it up. Okay, so that's really all that's doing. Now, using a transient master on your drum hits is really good because, yeah, you can add more punch to your drums and you can tighten them up. And when you strategically use it on specific drum sounds, like the kicks or the snares or the different breaks, you can really help get the frequency strong and tight so they can layer in nicely together. So I'll just be on the kick. I have this wave shaper on, and then the transient master. And I will slightly boost the attack. Okay, I'm not going to reduce the sustain because I want my kick to have that boom to it. I don't want to tighten it up so it sounds like a stick hitting the floor or something. I need it to have that boom because our kick needs to be big. And I don't want to go too crazy with the attack. I don't want to go like this because once I put transient master on all my drum sounds and they all layer together, there's going to be a lot of transients there. So, boosting the transients in all of your sounds a lot, by the end, it's just going to sound ridiculous. So, be gentle with this. Now, this isn't always. Of course, there is that one random sound where, I want to take a more creative approach and I'll really boost the attack or really reduce the sustain a lot. But that is the exception. The general rule is just, less is more, okay? So I'm not going to reduce the sustain on the kick again, or like I said, because I need that boominess. So that's really just where we're going to stay for now. If I want, I can put a limiter on it, and I'll actually control the volume through there. So I can reset it here, and I can reduce the ceiling to -3 just to clip off the top of that transient and to control our sound. So we'll get into some more mixing later. Now we can move on to the next sound, our snare. I'm just going to reset that volume. Now again, I'll go back to this step-by-step processing chain that I'm telling you about. And again, it consists of the EQ, distortion, transient shaping, and limiting. Okay? We can get into reverb and this type of stuff later, so if you're thinking about reverb, I'll cover that after. Now, step 1, the EQing. Again, as I said, this is used to clean up your sounds. So really, we want to remove any unwanted frequencies. All right, Nathan, I see your question. What kind of pre-processing did you do on the kick, the snare, and the break? So this kick was actually created with a plugin called Kick 2. It's a kick synthesizer, and it's really cool. It has a lot of really nice kicks on it, and I like it because you can layer in basically a sub, just a pure sine wave into your kick. But this is already something more advanced. I'll be talking about this in future tutorials. And then, yeah, just really was just some distortion and some compression, transient processing. But I will do future tutorials on sound design, teaching how to make specific sounds. I'm trying to keep this tutorial a bit basic so beginners can understand. Plus, there are so many good samples. I mean, it's 2019. There are so many sample packs available everywhere, and they're there to be used. So, I recommend just finding the best samples you possibly can and start there, because it's much easier to start with a good sound and to make even better music than to start with some shit sound and try layering them and try to make a good sound out of it. So now back to the processing chain on the drums. So I just want to point out that this is a similar chain to every drum sound, okay? So really, it's just the EQing, the distortion, the transient shaping, and the limiting. So what I'll do is I will hold on a second, reading your question. Seems like the stream can't be set to lower than 1080p. Currently with this stream, I'm going to be updating to a new platform, so you won't have that problem, Sven. But right now, it's only available at 1080p. Just try to hang in there. If it really doesn't work, you can contact me after, and I will send you the recording. So with the snare, we can see on Fab Filter Pro Q, or even if we have any frequency analyzer, we can see that this snare has a pretty big response on these low frequencies. And for a snare, we don't need that, okay? The only sounds that we want to sit down here is our sub and our kick. So right away, this tells me that I have to remove these frequencies. So I'm gonna create a low cut, and I'll just cut this, let's say, around 100 hertz, all right? Yeah, I'll leave it here. So we removed the sub off that snare. That way it'll sit better in the mix with our other sounds. Now I'm going to go to step 2, which is distortion. And I'll open up Crash 2. I'll close the preset manager, click on saturate. I'll use tape saturation. Now I'm going to pop on my headphones. So with the saturation, we can adjust the drive, and this is going to help boost the saturation. So I'll just bring that up to 3. And then I'll go to the next step. I'll do some transient processing. I'll boost that attack by 10%, and I'll reduce the sustain a little bit. And in addition to that, I'm going to click on the sample itself, and with FL Studio, I know in Ableton and Logic you can do this as well, but in FL Studio, what I'll do is on the sampler, I will click this button, the quick fade out, and I'll just fade. I'll fade the sample out a little bit, so it reduces the tail, and it just makes it a bit tighter. Then on slot 5, I'll add a limiter, and I'll bring this ceiling down to -3. Okay. So I'm just gonna push through the rest of the sounds because it's a really similar process through every sound. Okay. So we're on the hats. We go to the Pro Q. See how this has already been pre-processed. If needed, I would remove these frequencies. Okay. Then we'll go to some saturation. Really brings out the sound. I'll just leave that drive on too. I'll just leave it just like that. I will edit the transients. Now, you could reduce the attack of the hats because the hats will be hitting at the same time as the kick and the snare. And in terms of the mix down, you want your kick and you want your snare to cut through all of your sounds. So to boost the attack here maybe doesn't make sense. But something we have to realize is that our hi-hats also hit in between when our kick and our snare is not hitting. You see this? So we're going to want these sounds to be strong. So what I'll do is I'll actually boost the attack, and I will sidechain the kick and the snare to the hats. So when the kick hits and the snare hits, the hats will duck a little bit. That way the transients won't interfere. Okay? So I'll get to sidechaining after I just quickly run through and process all the sounds. I'm just going to reset this here. I'm going to put a limiter. So here we have this first break, and I believe this is the mid-range break. Exactly. So the purpose of this break is to help add some mid-range frequencies into our drums. So I'm not gonna do too steep of a low cut. You can see here on FabFilter Pro Q, below the low cut, there's this decibel octave, you know, and basically this is the slope of the EQ. Now I won't do too steep of a slope because I still want to have a little bit of low frequencies here, but I'll just do a 90 hertz cut because I want a little bit of low frequencies here, okay? And it's really important that you don't just start low cutting everything, because if you start low cutting all of your sounds at 100 hertz or 150 hertz, if you just start doing this to all of your sounds just because, you're going to end up with a really hollow, thin sounding mix. So to get a good mix down, you need to have good mid-range and good low frequency response. You just need to be very selective with which sounds you do, because that lower mid-range and those lower frequencies, things can get really muddy and really messy really quick. So you have to try to be as precise as possible. So after the EQing, I'm just going to go to the saturation. Just going to boost that drive just a little bit. Okay. Then I'll jump to the transient processing. Just going to boost those transients a little bit. And I will reduce the sustain to about right here, because this is going to help tighten up the drums a lot. And I'll put a limiter. Just bring this down to -3. Just to give some headroom there. And we'll just keep on moving down the line. Okay, so you can see that this drum was already EQ'd. And I'm just going to go through again the distortion. I'm going to put on some saturation, some transient shaping. Just real gentle with that, and some limiting. Okay, so this break has a really strong kick. I don't want that layering with my kick, so I'm going to remove around 90 hertz. Step 2, the saturation. Then we'll get some transient on step 3. And then we'll put a limiter on it. Now, as I said, it's literally the same exact process through all the drum sounds, okay? And this is just to help our drums become stronger. Now, this is that layer, the splash. I really like this layer in my drums a lot. And this is just to help fill that very high frequency range. Because good drums, okay? Good drums complete the full spectrum. All right, to have a really full sounding drums in your track, you want to have drums that sit here, drums that sit here, and also that sit up here. So this splash really is just a very high passed drum loop that has a lot of shakers and a lot of tops. Like I layered many tops and shakers, and I high passed it a lot. Okay, it has a high cut here just because, you know, after 18K, you don't even hear this anyways. That's why you see this. But this is how this layer came about. Okay. So this has already been pre-EQ'd. If I was EQing this, you know, again, I would just do like a really high cut like this. But we don't have to because it's already been done. So I'll go to my step 2, which again, we're going to use this saturation and then tape saturation on trash just to help boost that sound. Maybe set that here. Then I will go to transient master, So I'm just going to reduce the attack here. As we already have so many sounds that have a lot of attack, they're all going to be layering together. I kind of just want this layer to sit inside my drums. And I can use the sustain, and instead of tightening our sound, I can use it to kind of extend it even more, so it can open up a little bit. Just so I can create more of this high frequency sound on the top of our drums. Now I would go through on the limiter and set it to -3, but this sound's already so quiet that, you know, it doesn't even need it. Okay. So when I layer all those together, it sounds like this. Now it's sounding a bit messy because we have a lot of frequency clashing going on. So what I'll do to help alleviate this problem is I'm going to sidechain some of my elements. Okay, so the kick and the snare are the most important part here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sidechain my kick to a few of the breaks, and also the snare to a few of the breaks, and the hi-hats as well. Now I'm not gonna sidechain the kick and the snare to every break. If not, it's really gonna create this sound that, like, when the kick hits, everything's gonna duck, and it's gonna sound a bit too, you know, stop and go. We don't want that. So I'm gonna have one of the breaks that I'm not gonna sidechain into, but this is a break that's gonna layer into our kick and snare anyway, so it's gonna sit nicely. So I'm going to start with the snare. Now I'm going to right click on the bottom of the channel that I want to sidechain to. So I'm going to sidechain the snare to, so yeah, to breaks 1 and break 3. So I'm going to right click at the bottom of break 1, and I'm going to click sidechain to this track. I'm going to right click on break 3, sidechain to this track. And I'll do the same with the kick. So break 1, break 3, and the snare I'm also going to do it to hats, to those hi-hats. Because there's high frequencies in the hi-hats and high frequencies in the snare. So when they hit at the same time, there's the frequency clash, and we don't want that. So that's why I'm going to sidechain my snare to the hats as well. Now you might be thinking, why not on the splash layer? Now again, this is just a very high frequencies. This we're just going to let sit in the mix. We don't want to sidechain anything there. So we'll start off with the hi-hats. I'll go to the limiter that I have on the hats, and I'm going to click on the compressor tab. And over here we have the sidechain box. Because we've already routed the snare to the hats, we can right click here, and we'll see that the snare it's plugged in. So I'm going to boost the knee all the way up. I'll bring the ratio to around this, in between 2 and 3 o'clock. Okay, you can. If you use FL and you use the Fruity limiter, you can leave these settings just like this. The knee all the way up, ratio, you know, around 2 or 3 o'clock. And then the threshold, this is going to be your variable. Now this is what's going to change from sound to sound. Because what this is doing is, when the snare hits, this is how much it's going to make the hat stuck. So if I bring the threshold all the way down, it's really going to remove the snare. I mean, it's going to remove the hats when the snare hits. So we don't want that effect. We just want it to cut through the mix better. And what's cool about the Fruity limiter is you can actually see a visual. You know, the white is the original hat, and then the purple is the gain reduction. So we can see here every time that the snare hits, it does this gain reduction. And this just allows our snare to cut through the mix a bit better with those hats. Now I'm also going to do the same with break 1. Just going to hit the compressor, sidechain the snare there. And I'll do the same on break 3. So this really allows our snare to cut through better. Now let's do the same with our kick. So to sidechain two sounds, like the kick and the snare, to the breaks, I'm gonna need another compressor on here. So I'm gonna put another limiter. I'm gonna leave all of the limiter settings alone. I'm just gonna go over to the compressor, and this time we're gonna click on the kick. So you can see if I bring the threshold all the way down, every time the kick hits, the drum break disappears. Again, this is too aggressive. We don't want this effect happening, but just so you know, those who don't understand what sidechaining is, here you can clearly see that. So do it around here. This allows the kick to cut through. Okay. I'll do the same with this kick. So now that I've sidechained the kick and the snare into the breaks, let's just go through and do some balancing by ear. Okay, I've got my headphones on so I can clearly hear all the sounds. Now I'm just going to adjust the sounds accordingly. I'm just going to lower my hats, and I'm doing this all by ear, just really whatever is sounding good to me right now. Okay, so again, this is the phase one mixing. I don't want to go too detailed. I don't want to waste too much time here because we're gonna, later on when the track is complete, that's when I'll really dive in and I'll do my final mix down. And I will have a whole other tutorial just specifically on how to do that final mix down because things get pretty technical and pretty detailed and it's time consuming. So in this tutorial, it's really just going to be, showing the basic mix and just how to get the track going. So let's move over to our piano. Or actually, before that, I want to process these shakers. Almost forgot about those. Okay, as you can see, it's already processed. We don't want any low frequencies, especially because this is a high frequency sound. Now I'm just gonna balance that by ear. That's really how I would go about getting my drums prepared and getting them ready to go on creating the track. So does anyone have any questions about anything that I just covered right now? Okay, I'm assuming that no one has any questions about that. So I'm just going to duplicate the structure here, and I'm going to introduce this new percussion. And actually, you know what? I'm going to do this a bit differently, maybe. Let me go here. Bongos. I'm going to introduce a few more sounds. I'm going to introduce this ride loop. And these bongos. So in terms of the structuring with the drums, I'm designing them like this. Again, here we have four different phrases. You can see here there's a 16-bar loop, and there's 4 different 16-bar loops. And if you look at it, you can see a pattern. You can see that these sounds are all consistent. So these drum loops, as an example, this ride, this is not one of my samples. But these other sounds, these are sounds that I have created using other samples, processing them. They are not my own recorded drums or anything like that. These are just samples that I have layered, processed, and rendered, and that I use in my productions. In future tutorials, I'll be doing one on sound design. I'll teach you how to make your own drum kits, how to make your own drum breaks, and you know, how to start creating your own type of sample bank so you can have a more how can I say, you know, a specific sound behind your productions. So I've added in this ride and these bongos, and I've structured them like this for a specific reason, and that's really just to help make it more progressive and make it a bit more interesting, because you know, I have this ride and it's going to come in on the second half of every phrase. Yeah, I'm going to be hosting more free tutorials. This is just like a beta test here to see how this works out and to see if people are enjoying it. And you know, if all goes good, I'm going to be hosting more tutorials, and not only from myself, also I'm going to host other industry experts as well. So it's going to be pretty cool. Now back to this. With the rides, I'm putting these rides here as a progression to the phrase. Okay. So you can see as the phrase goes on in the second half of the phrase, it comes the rides to show the end, and then it transitions. It comes in the new element. And then at the second half of this phrase, again, it's going to come the rides. Okay. And then what I could do is like to make here a transition. So it helps give a very progressive format here to the drums. It always keeps it sounding fresh. It doesn't sound boring, the same thing over and over again, you know? It just helps keep it interesting, okay? Let me just add these bongos and the rides to the mixer. Put this bongos and rides. And I'll just go through and process these real quick. So these rides don't need to be processed. Oh, actually, so you see how these frequencies are cutting through? This is really important. So how the wave, you know, the frequencies are basically ending around here, you know, in between 500 and 1K. So I'm just gonna go ahead and just low cut right there, okay? It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. I'll go through, I'll use trash, use some tape saturation, and then I'll put some transient shaping on that. It's going to boost the attack a little bit. Hey Charlie, can you hear me? You can bring the limiter down to -3 on the rides as well. Okay, Charlie, so to answer your question, these rides that I'm working with right now, these are not my rides. This is a sample, okay? The other drum sounds, these HumaNature top loops, HumaNature drum loops, HumaNature mid-range, these are drum breaks that I have created using various breaks, you know, doing a processing chain on them, and just compiling my own sound with various sounds through layering and processing, and then I've saved them to create my own drum kits. In future tutorials, I will teach you how to create your own drum kits, but that's, you know, more sound design. That's a whole different topic. As I mentioned in the beginning, there is an abundance of samples online. Choose the best sounds that match the style that you're going for and go with that. Especially because, you know, I've noticed this is a big problem I notice with beginner producers. They avoid using samples. Or, you know, they'll use drum samples, but they won't use like a bass sample or like a synth sample or something like that, which makes no sense. Because, you know, if you're going to say, oh, I make my own sounds, but then you use drum samples, that just doesn't align, you know, with that. Now, you know, the samples, they're royalty free, which means you can use them, you can release them, and you can collect the payments off the music, even though you release with those samples. And they're there to be used, okay? Every producer uses samples, and if you don't use samples, you're really limiting yourself to your potential. So I'm going to process these bongos as well real quick. They've already been pre-processed, but I'm just going to put some more distortion on them. And I'll balance them. Okay, so Dean, saturation in basic terms. What saturation does, saturation is a distortion. It's a type of distortion. And basically all it does is it boosts the harmonic frequencies in your sound that are already there. Okay, what do I have on the master? The master is just a spectrum analyzer, that's it. That's all. But yeah, Dean, a saturation is distortion, and it boosts the harmonics in your sound that are already there. So it's a really good way, I consider it the best way to boost your sound, or to make it stronger, to make it fatter. Yeah. Okay, so now that I have this basic drum layout done, I will go through and start working on building the melody. So I've already put in this piano here, and I'm just going to go through some processing on this just to make it sit the way that I want it to. So I'm going to EQ it. It has these frequencies down here, you know, 60 hertz and below on the piano. We really don't need this. Okay, this is going to interfere with our sub bass when we create that. So I'll just cut that around 60 hertz for now. And this ties into what I said earlier. Like, you don't just want to do 100 hertz low cut on all your sounds, or else your mix is going to sound really thin. Okay, so I'll actually do, you know, around like 80 hertz, and I'll reduce that slope. And this sound, there aren't that many high frequencies present. Now, normally when you use an EQ, you want to take the subtractive approach, meaning you want to remove frequencies. But this is one of those special cases where we're going to boost the frequencies on the EQ. Okay, so I'm going to boost some high frequencies here, just to bring out that piano to make it a bit more bright. Really important for those who use FabFilter Pro Q, underneath the help right here there's this decibel limit. I always work with it at 30 dB. By default I think it's on 6, and basically this is just like a zoom. So, you know, on 6 it's really zoomed in, and when you make changes it doesn't affect that much. So if you really want to be able to make big changes on the EQ, change it to 30 dB, and here you can really make some big changes. Okay, so we've boosted those frequencies. Now I will make here a reverb send on my mixer. Now this is basically just a channel that I can send the signal from any other channel. I send it to here, and then it's going to get whatever processing is on here. So I will put a reverb. I'll use the Valhalla Room. I'll leave the mix on 100%. What I'll do is I'll just start to send the signal there. Just get a little bit of reverb. You want to be gentle with that. Less is more on everything, okay? So you guys can see that our piano, it's clipping. So I'm going to put a limiter on it. I'm going to bring that down to -3. So that's going to help control it. It won't pass -3 now. And what I'll do actually is I'll put isotope trash 2 on that as well, and I'm going to saturate this piano. Shape this EQ. So I'm going to take a different approach here. I noticed limiting the sound was compressing it too much, so I'm actually just going to limit it at 0 dB, and then I'll just change the volume here. To answer your question, Charlie, if you paid attention in the beginning, when I'm creating liquid drum and bass, I start with some type of melodic element, and then I start to build the drums around that. But because I already knew the piano I was going to use, I just started to build my drums after. Because, you know, I created these drums specifically to match this vibe. So you could go through and make the drums first and then try to find a melody that fits, and it's just going to be more difficult. I find it, you know, through years and years and years of practice, I've noticed when I create liquid drum and bass, it's the best to start with a good melody. So I'll actually move this limiter down to the bottom of the chain, and I'll put here a FabFilter Timeless 2. Basically, Timeless 2, this is just a reverb delay plugin. I'm going to leave it on its default setting because here it has a tape delay. So I'm just going to reduce the mix level just so the delay isn't too strong. Now, so you're going to sidechain again as well, or one of the drums. Now, I'm not going to sidechain this piano, at least not yet. Okay. If I need in the future, I will sidechain probably the snare to the piano, and that's because the piano and the snare, they share the frequencies, so there could be a frequency clash there. But as of right now, I'm not going to do that just yet. So now that I have my drums going, I have this piano going, I am going to start layering in the bass line. Okay. So I will use, basically how I'm going to create my bass is I'm going to get a mid-range, and then I'll layer in a sub. Okay, so we'll start with the mid-range first. Now again, just to keep it simple, I'm going to use a synth and to use a patch. There are so many synths in today's days. You know, you got the most common ones are Serum and Massive. There's so many patches available everywhere. In future tutorials, I will show you guys some synthesis and some sound design on exactly how to design your own patches. But again, this type of workflow, synthesizing a bass patch, I do not recommend to do it when you're creating a track. You know, this is a different type of session that you want to have. The synthesis session where you just go through and you create your own patches. So for future sessions, you have some sounds to search for. So I'm going to use Omnisphere. There's this really cool preset here that I've been using in my past few tracks that I really like a lot. It's called DNB bass. It's really cool because it's got like that low pass Reese type sound to it. Yeah, I'll turn up the mic. Can you hear me now? So this is the Reese I'm going for, and this is going to be our mid-range in the bass. It's pretty quiet the way that it is, so I'm just going to route it here. Actually, I'm going to route that back into my bass 1 channel, or into my mid. And what I'm going to do to boost this sound is, you guessed it, I'm going to use the tape saturation. This is the best type of distortion to use to boost your sounds, okay? because again, it's just boosting the harmonics that are already in the sound. So you can really see like an A and B. This is with it off. This is with it on. It really boosted a lot, yeah? Now, I'm going to create a bass line here. It's going to make an 8-bar loop. So let's see here. I am going to go through music theory and really explain, you know, chords and scales and the different keys and all of this in future sessions. This is just more of a general breakdown session of how to create a track. So, you know, I will have future tutorials that I teach music theory. Also, I offer one-to-one coaching as well, and that's where I really get in depth on a one-on-one level, and I can train you guys on literally anything you need to know. So basically how I'm going about this is I'm just going to use the root note here, which is B. Now this is the note that's harmonizing with the piano. Let me mute the drums here. So I'm going to start off with that B note. Okay, it's looking like we're going to go down to the B. Exactly, it's going to go to an F sharp after. And then to an A. So there is the most basic version of the bass loop. Now to make it a bit more interesting, I'm going to do an octave jump on the second note. So that'll help it make it a bit more interesting. And again, because we work in a phrase, we need to make the second half of the bass line. And here I'm going to make it slightly different because I want to create a turnaround. So let's find a harmonic here. Listen to this. So we could keep the pattern and we could do something similar there. So on the end of the phrase, we have the bass line. It makes this octave jump here, just to give it some variation so it can loop back into the beginning. So now I'm going to create our sub to layer into this, and I'll do that by, again, you could use Massive, you could use Serum, you could use anything. I'm just going to use the 3X oscillator. This is an in-house plugin on FL. Okay, it's one of the stock plugins. By default, it's already set to sine wave, and really the sub is the most basic synth patch that you can create. Okay, this is like level 1 beginner synth. Okay, your sub bass, you always want it to be a pure sine wave. Now if you want a bit more harmonics, you could use a square wave, and then you could remove some high frequencies, but yeah, we'll talk about that later. Really the most common sub is just a pure sine wave, and I'm going to change these different oscillators. So it's down minus 24 semitones. And just so we can boost those harmonics, I'm going to route my sub to the sub channel. And I'm going to put, I'll use a wave shaper this time. You know, I'll use a combination of wave shaper and trash 2. Now, by boosting the harmonics, okay, this will actually be a really good example to show you what saturation does. So you guys can see here on the frequency analyzer, we just have the pure sine wave. When we add the saturation, what we're doing is to the sound is boosting harmonics. So you can see here, this is the pure sine, and then when we saturate, we're just boosting the harmonics. And really the harmonics are just intervals of the harmonizing frequencies. So, you know, it won't create any type of dissonance, it's just always going to be harmonizing. And then we're using the tape saturation on trash 2 just to really boost that up. And now because we have these high frequencies here in the sub, what I'll do is I'm going to put a Pro Q, and I'm going to do a high cut, and I'm going to remove those high frequencies. Cut to about 150 hertz. So now we have a strong sub, okay? Just going to put a limiter on there. We'll mix the sub level after. Okay, cool. So I want to match the sub with our mid-range. So I'm literally just going to copy these piano notes. I'm going to put it on the sub as well. I need to put it an octave lower because this is a bit too high of a tone. So I'm going to put it in a lower octave. Now, a few of you might have noticed that these on the mid-range, these notes on the mid-range, they're overlapping. Yeah, Oliver, I'll show you in just a second. So these bass notes on the mid-range, they're overlapping because the legato is turned on this bass patch. So that means when the notes overlap, they just glide. Okay? They don't overlap. But on the sub, we can't do that because if they overlap, they're going to layer together and then it's going to be two sines playing at the same time and we don't want that. So Oliver, just to show you real quick again, man, you just want to open up a 3x oscillator, literally just bring oscillator 1 down to 0, oscillator 2 down to 0, and that's it. There's your sub. To boost your sub, route it to the mixer, put a wave shaper on it, boost the wave shape, okay? That's going to boost the harmonics. And if you have isotope trash 2, also put some tape saturation on there. You can leave it at its default setting. And then put a Pro Q on it. Or put a parametric EQ2 or whatever kind of EQ you're using. Do a high cut and remove those high frequencies. So now we just have these boosted subtones. And we're going to see that in our mid-range, we also have sub. So this is where we now need to remove some of the frequencies from the mid. We don't want to remove too many or else it's going to sound a bit thin and hollow, but I'll do about 85 hertz cut. And now them just fitting it together, it's sounding like our bass has a sub below it. Just going to go to our second pattern because we have this turnaround on the bass, so I'm going to make sure we have a sub under here too. Just going to layer these. All right, perfect. I'm going to bring this down. So this is how we create our sub and how we layer it in. And because I really love to work with audio samples, I'm going to bounce this mid-range down to audio, and I'm going to bounce the sub down to audio as well. So how I do this in FL is I can enable the recording. So I'm going to left click on this circle down here of the sub, and I'm going to left click on the mid. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Because like I said, this overlapping that you're seeing, this is only on the mid-range. And the mid-range is overlapping because in the patch, there's this attack. Like in the very beginning, it does this sound. It's like wow, right? But if you hold it down and I overlap notes, it doesn't do that attack again. So that's why they're overlapping. Okay, the sub isn't doing it, only that mid-range. Now, I could go into the synth, I could remove the attack, but I don't want to confuse the beginners here. So I've enabled the recording on the sub and the mid. I'm going to press Alt-R. I'm going to change the wave depth to 24-bit, and I will start the recording. And this is going to bounce down the sub and the mid. Let's just give that a second. I personally like to work with audio samples because you can edit them in a different way. Also, it really saves the CPU speed. Okay. Yeah, with FL, if you want to bounce down stems, like if you're ever working on a project with someone and you want to bounce down stems, you could literally just like click all of these at the same time and just press Alt-R. You can render all the stems at once, just like that. So here's our sub. It's a fat sub right there. Could normalize it, but we're just gonna leave it like that. And then here's our mid-range. Now, you see, that's that attack I was talking about. But here it doesn't have it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slice this part out. So there's our bassline. Set that to bass 1. I'll set this to bass 2. And we'll delete that. Now, I'm going to sidechain my kick to the sub. And I'm going to open up a limiter, going to go to the compressor, going to plug in the kick. And the reason why we're doing this is because our sub, it's all low frequencies, right? Oh, click here to the frequency analyzer. So our sub covers this part of the spectrum, and if you notice, our kick also shares the frequencies. So they don't interfere. We're going to sidechain the kick to the sub. Okay, this way when the kick hits, the low frequencies in the sub disappear a little bit, so the low frequencies in the kick can come through. So we're just going to click on the compressor, right out of the kick. I don't want to do it so aggressively that every time the kick hits, the sub really disappears, because then on the big sound system, when it's played really loud, it's not going to sound good. Sean, am I right that the limiter is sidechain using volume? Been told before that sidechain frequencies. Yes, correct. Correct. Sean, the limiter sidechains by volume. Okay, that's why I'm not gonna do it with such an aggressive threshold, or else the volume of the sub is gonna duck too much. Now on your kick, you could roll it off at 30 hertz, okay, depending on your kick. If the sample needs it, sure. You know, really just depends on the sample that you're working with. If you're using a kick sample that has very strong frequency response below 30 hertz, yeah, you could definitely roll off the very, very, very bottom end of your kick, just because the kick doesn't need to have that. Okay, but the sub does. So with this kick, I'll do that just for the sake of the tutorial. Yeah, it really just depends on the kick that you're using. So now that we have our bass plugged in, I'm going to show you guys this technique. Okay, this will probably be a game changer for a few of you here. Now, I call this the key finder technique. And this is really how we can go through. We can decipher what key we're working in now based on the sounds that we have. And this will allow us to search for samples in that same key. So watch this. I'm going to just render out my master. And I use this software called Key Finder. Okay. Now you can, I'll pull up the link, and I will put it in the chat. Just bear with me. There we go. So I just put the link to download this software. It's for free. Now, this, you can put any piece of audio in here, and it'll tell you what key it's in. Okay, but there's a specific preferences that you want to have. For those of you who want to implement this and you want to use this technique, if this resonates with you and you want to start doing this, just after the masterclass, I will post pictures of the preferences so you can edit your preferences to be the same as mine. Now, basically, my preferences are set to, so it's going to automatically name the file, and then it's going to automatically name it with a specific custom key code based on the Camelot wheel. I'll explain this more in future tutorials, but it'll rename your file based on what key it's in. Okay. Again, I'll upload a picture of this after the masterclass. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this track. Sub is way too loud here. We're going to have to lower that. And I'm just going to drop it into Key Finder, and it's going to tell me what key it's in. Okay? It says it's in. It says that the key it's in 10A, B minor. Okay? So now that I know what key I'm working in, now I can go back to Splice and I can start searching up sounds in the key of B minor. And this is really gonna, narrow my search to sounds that are gonna already potentially work with my track because they're in the same key. They have a better chance of harmonizing. Not every sample is gonna work, because the key of the samples, they change over time. But this is really going to help narrow our search to sounds that will work. I went through my whole library renaming using this in key. It took me months. Yeah, you actually don't have to rename them yourself. With Key Finder, it automatically renames it. So I'll be posting the picture of the preferences. Key Finder is completely free. Mixed in key, it's like 50 euros or some shit like that. I don't know. But Key Finder is completely free, and I will post the picture of the preferences so you guys can configure it correctly. So yeah, now that I know it's in 10A, B minor, I can just go through and start searching other sounds. I can even go through and look for vocals and yeah, just anything, right? We can just start digging, and this really narrows our options. So this is really what helps you create ideas fast. Okay, like, let's say I'm in the studio alone, I'm working on an idea. I'll usually have an idea going in less than an hour. And if I don't have a good idea going in less than an hour, I will literally trash that idea and I'll start something new. Just because I find that my best tracks, my best ideas, they happen really fast. All the samples just work perfectly together. It's just a quick process. And this is one of the key elements that allows me to work in this quick workflow. Okay? Yeah, Splice really helps out a lot. Another cool one is Loop Cloud. Okay, with Loop Cloud, it's kind of like Splice. It's literally the same thing, but it's from Loop Masters. Now, I will say that Loop Cloud is better for drum and bass. Okay, because Loop Masters removed all of their sample packs from Splice because they created Loop Cloud. And Splice, all of their sample packs are not on Loop Cloud. So there's like two different cloud databases. They both have a shitload of samples. They're both really good. I mean, if you're serious about music production, you should sign up with Splice. You should sign up with Loop Cloud. I won't even post a referral link or anything because I don't have that prepared. But you can literally just go to splice.com and make an account, or loopcloud.com. You can make an account. And then it's like, instead of buying a full sample pack, it's like you can just browse sample by sample, and then like you just buy one sample, and it's done with credits. It's yeah, it's really cool. You have to check it out. Okay, if you're not using Loop Cloud or Splice, you are literally behind the game. Okay, so back to here. So this is how I was able to find, you know, these other sounds that harmonize in the track so well. So, you know, I was able to find this synth loop. Okay, I'll bring this down here. My OCD, just gonna arrange this like that. So that's how I was able to find this synth loop that's harmonizing with our track. Yeah, Sean, also at Splice you can rent VSTs. Like you can rent Serum for like 10 euros per month or some shit like that. It's really handy. You guys have to check it out. I highly recommend it. So, okay, I found this through Splice. Now, as it is, this is it's not even a drum and bass sample. It's from like, I don't know, I think it was from like some like house sample pack, or, you know, and it's like 110 BPM. It's just some random thing. So we have to know how to then work with the sample. Okay. By the way, for the people watching on Twitch, the chat is constantly being deleted because I want you guys in the chat on the event page. So if you want to chat with us and you want to have access to the chat, go to the event page and don't watch it on Twitch. Okay, Twitch was the solution that I'm using just for today. Future sessions will not be done on Twitch. Okay, so if you want to join the chat, come to the event page and talk in the event page, as I already previously mentioned before we started. Okay, because I noticed a few people on Twitch were asking why is the chat being deleted? Because we are not using Twitch. We are using the event page. So okay, with this sample, what I'm going to do is I'm going to time stretch it. So this is 8-bar loop. Now I'm going to edit it so it can fit. So I'm going to begin here. And I'm just going to resample this a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to resample this a little bit so it makes a cool rhythm. I had someone tell me that they lost the sound. Can you guys hear me? Someone give me a shout if you can hear the music and if you can hear me. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay. So yeah, whoever said that they lost the sound, maybe just refresh it. Okay. So I just created this. Stretches across, and I'm working on the phrase. Yeah, whoever just heard me typing. Sorry, I'm responding to people on Twitch. I'm just responding to someone on Twitch real quick. Okay, just a second, bear with me. Alright, so I have resampled this a bit to create this type of rhythm. Me personally, this is where my creativity took me. I just feel like it sounds better this way instead of its face value, yeah? Okay, so we'll stick like that. Now, I also found another sound because I know what key it's in. I go to Splice, I search up the samples in the same key. So I found this synth, resampled that, edited it in. Let me just throw it in the mixer, put a Pro Q on it, check the frequency response. Okay, I see there's some low frequencies here. Let me remove that. Okay. Put a limiter on here. Set this to -3 just so nothing is peaking. Now I'm going to layer in another sound. I found this guitar. It was from like some type of, I don't know, some type of atmospheric indie soundscapes sample pack. I don't fucking know, okay? This is what it sounds like originally. I heard some potential here. I felt like I could resample it. First, let me just time stretch it. So it's an even 16 bars. And I'm just going to use these first 2 bars. And I'm going to loop this. Okay. Bear with me. It's just responding back to someone. So now that I've looped this, there's a lot of low frequencies here. I can hear it. I can hear it through my headphones. So I'm gonna layer this in. First, I'm gonna EQ it, and there's some weird, like, these frequencies here are weird. So I'm gonna do a low cut, just like that. It's really all I want. I just want that guitar, so when it's layering in with our other sounds, it sits nicely. Okay. So I'm going to start to structure this out a little bit, now that I have these other elements. And I will... another sound, okay? I found this random Chinese instrument. It sounds like this. Some type of string instrument. it's harmonizing, okay? It's in the same key, the sounds they harmonize with the track, so I was able to take inspiration from it. Now I'm gonna resample it so it fits perfectly with our track. But before I do that, I'm gonna need to time stretch it. I'm gonna just make sure it's at 16 bars. Now, to resample this, I'm going to create a sequence from it so it sounds more interesting in our track. Do something like this. Something like that, yeah? And I'm gonna put it on the mixer, open up the EQ, and remove these low frequencies. And you know what? I'm gonna pitch this sound down an octave, okay? I'm gonna pitch it all the way down. And we'll create here a small with Ableton, this would be like a volume fade clip in the beginning and the end just to remove some clicks. With FL, the declicking mode, I just went to generic bleeding and I made it so it removes the clicks. So I'm going to layer this sound, put this here on this part of the structure. Something like this. So this is going to help keep the variation in our structure a bit interesting, because not only is the track always progressing with the drums, you know, every 16 bars progresses with the bass, but then it progresses with the elements as well. Hey Tom, I made this track recently, you know, just so I can release here on the tutorial, and maybe I will complete this all the way and I will release this. Yeah, there's definitely a possibility. Hey Alex, thanks for coming by, man. I hope to see you in future sessions. So now that I have arranged the structure, let's start doing some type of transitions. Javon, you said, I guess it'll be the next one thing to ask, is the declicking mode a case-by-case basis? Yeah, so Javon, it's definitely a case-by-case basis. Some samples you won't need to do that, but in the case of this sample, when I chopped it and I rearranged it at the ends, there was a few clicks and pops. So I did that declicking mode, so it can just do a quick volume fade out, and that'll help, really help clean up the mix. By the way, I know some of you just, you know, you have a schedule, you have other things to do, you really can't stay until the very end. But what I will say is the people who do stay until the end, I'm going to offer you guys a free sample pack. It has 168 brand new sounds, completely exclusive, have never been seen before. They were created specifically to give away as the first sample pack for DNB tutorials. So those of you who hang out until the end, I will be giving you guys the free sample pack. So we have this basic arrangement created in our track now. Let's start to create some type of transitions here. Let me do it at the snare. So I'm going to have these drums cut out on the snare. Hey Andy, I'm glad that you're getting something out of this, man. So I did this small transition at the end of the first phrase. Again, when you want to do transition, you just need to think about removing some elements so the other ones can breathe. And then when it comes back into the next phrase, you introduce something new. So that's really what you're seeing here. You know, music production is just this big geometric pattern. This is something you start to understand once you work with production a long time. Because look, if I were to just show you, you know, we do this transition because the bass note, it goes to this higher octave. You know, it changes here when the snare hits. So I'm using the snare. I'm gonna use the snare to trigger the drums going away. And when they come back, the bongos are in. Hey Dean, thanks for stopping by, man. Just add me on my personal profile, send me a message, and I'll sort you out with the video. So for the second phrase, because we're going to do a major transition here, we're going from this main piano into the second part of the track. I'm going to make a pretty big transition here, okay? I'm going to start with a kick build. So watch this. This, and I'm literally gonna slice this down, and I'm gonna make a kick build. Okay, I'm gonna make a kick fill. So I'm gonna pull this back, and this is how this goes. Okay, so go like this, and I'm going to then double this up. So it sounds something like this. So on these last four, we're going to then double that up. It's like a fractal pattern. There's like 4, and then 4 even quicker, and then just the last 8 are. To complete this big transition, because it's going to go into the next part of the track, not only will I do a transition before the next phrase, but I'm going to do a transition in the beginning of the next phrase as well. So I'll do something like this. So I'm going to start it on this kick here. Just like this. Let me pull one of these kicks here. Just to make this transition a bit more intricate, I'll have it so when the snare hits, sound stop, and then it comes back in with the shaker. just like we did on the first phrase. What I'll do for the final, because then we're going to go into the breakdown, but first I'll make the intro and then we'll make the breakdown. I'll do like a simple low pass. So on the drums master, I'll put a filter. I'm going to remove the high pass, going to turn off the resonance, and I'm going to right click on the cutoff frequency, and I'm going to create an automation clip on the cutoff. Now, to those beginners, as I explained in the very beginning, I have my drums grouped together. I have all these drum sounds plugged into this drums master. So now I can put a filter on the drums master. I can automate the cutoff, and it's going to do this on all of the sounds. Hey Oliver, yes, you're right. We still didn't get there yet. I'm going to add some risers, I'll add some sweeps, but first I'm just working on the transitions. Then we'll add some effects to support our transitions and just to help each phrase, you know, transfer from one to another. Since it's going to go to the breakdown, I'm going to give it a little bit of a bigger filter sweep, just so we can let the listener know that, you know, drums are going away, it's going to change again. So then from here, it could just like go into the piano. Okay. Now you can see when it changes from phrase to phrase, like. Sure, because of the transition, it helps sound fresh, but it's still a bit dry. So what we can do to really make it more interesting is we can start adding some effects. Okay, so I'll put this reverse crash here. Okay, I'll put a reverse crash here as well. I will put a riser here on major transition. Cut it here. And I will put, say, I'll put here a sweep. Time stretch the sweep. And I'll put here another sweep. Now, basically, to those beginners, the sweep is like a riser goes up, the sweep goes down. And I'll also put here. I'll make this one unique, and I'll just change this one a little bit so it's a bit different. So your effects, you know, I'm working with a liquid track, so what I'll do is I'm just going to put some reverb and delay on it. That's really what just helps the best. So I'll show you guys here not only how to do that, but I'll show you how to create a mixer bus. Okay, so to those beginners who are wondering, like, how the hell did you group your drums together? How do you group sounds together? Well, this is how you do it. So you want to put your sounds on the mixer. Once they're on the mixer, go to an empty channel. You can press F2 or you can right click on it, rename. I'm going to call it like FX bus. I'm going to give it a color. just so visually it's easier to look at. Now I will highlight all of these. I'm just holding down Control. I'm holding down Control and clicking and sweeping across all of my effects. I'm holding down Alt and I'm pressing a directional arrow. So left and right, you can move them. Now they're all highlighted. I'm going to right click on the effects bus, route to this track only. So now they're all routed here. So this effects bus controls all of the effects now. So now what I can do is I'm going to put a Pro Q. I'm going to make sure that there's no low frequencies anywhere. Because your effects, you do not need low frequencies on your effects. I mean, if you're using an impact, it's different, but we'll get to that in a different time. I'll put a timeless 2 on it as well. Okay. So this will just make it a bit more wet, and I'll run it through that reverb bus we made. Second. Okay, so this is going along for all of our effects. If you want, you can even do some saturation on the effects bus to boost the harmonics of those sounds. It'll make them bigger. Okay, you can use a limiter so it doesn't get all crazy. All the effects, they all have some reverb delay on them, no low frequencies. Hey Charlie, yeah, so for FabFilter Saturn, that is a saturation tool. If I'm processing a bass, I will experiment with some of that, but lately my go-to saturation is Trash. Waves. The Waves bundle has an excellent one as well, but Waves is pretty damn expensive, so most people don't have that. Trash has a free trial, you can get that, okay? And FL Studio has Wave Shaper, which is a great tool as well. Like I could literally just use Wave Shaper for everything and I'll still get great results. But yeah, Charlie, basically to summarize, I'd like to experiment with Saturn on bass sounds. Okay, so we've decorated the track with some effects. This helps keep the transitions fresh. So let's build here some type of intro and then the breakdown. I'll have the track start here at bar 49, and we'll just like this. Let's start to, and yeah, just real quick before I start making the intro, I just want to talk about this phrase, like these 64 bars that we created here. So I started by creating the first drop, and this is how I always make my tracks. I will never make a track from starting with the intro. Okay, I only make the intro and the breakdown and this type of stuff after, because I like to build my track vertically before I go horizontal. Okay, so because if I build my track in a vertical, I'll know. As an example, if I were to just go and layer all the sounds together, all of these sounds, I know they all work together perfectly because they all harmonize. Okay. If I were to go here and play all these sounds together, they all work perfect together. So because I know I have all these sounds that work perfect together, now I can stretch it out vertically, I can arrange and structure them, and I'll have some good content here to variate through and make a song with. So I start building vertically, and then once we have the sounds that we want, then we can start stretching it out horizontally and making structure and arrangement. So I'm gonna go here to the intro, and let's just do something like this. I'm gonna take this reverse crash, I'll make that unique, and then I'll reverse it. So we have a little impact hit there. I will put this here. Some drums here. Let's put the drum filter. Stretch out these drums. Bear with me. And you know what I'll do is I will I'm just going to create an automation here. So it sounds like, you know, you can hear the drums coming from a distance. They're starting to build up. Maybe we'll go like this. We'll do a transition here as well. Let's try like this. Now I will take this kick build, I'm just gonna like stick that build right here. So it starts 2 bars and 4. Take it, I'll slice this 2 bars and 4. Pop this out. And I'm gonna change this part. So I'm gonna mess with the structure of the drums here a little bit. See how this sounds. Let me slice this. Now I'm going to remove the drums here, so it gives a small break of just complete silence, and then the filter is going to open up actually before the drums come back in. That way it doesn't create a pop or a click. When it hits again. And I'm going to introduce the bass as well. So I'll make an automation here. Filter on the mid-range. I'll do a low pass. bass starts to introduce just a little bit before the track drops. Yeah, that's a bit loud. So let's do some automations here on this piano. In the intro, I will put a filter on the piano. I'll do a low pass on this as well. Turn on the X2. So this is going to make the slope, you know, like on the EQ. Basically what this X2 on the Fruity filter does is it's like this. Like normally, let's say it's like this. When you put the X2, it goes like that. It makes the filter a lot stronger. Something like that. On the specific sound, I'm going to put more timeless. I'm just going to do some layers of delay. The term is called delay stacking. So we have a bigger delay on that crash right there. Yeah, if this track could get some vocals, that would be perfect. Really, the vocals would do great here. Then we can literally loop it back around to around this stage. So for the sake of the tutorial, to speed this up, because I do have class I have to get on with one of my students. So watch this. I'm going to go like this. So does anyone have any questions up until now? Can you guys hear me still? Joe, cool man. Yeah, well, you know what? I can't really say that. Who knows? You know what? Maybe I will do a self-release on Bandcamp. So yeah, I'll definitely let you know about that, Joe. Awesome, guys. Glad to hear you can still hear me. Thanks for the response there. So just to give a little bit of a variation here in the second drop, I'll do like a little delay on the drop. So yeah, I'll do something like that. or we call it like a false drop. So I'll just do a variation here. So, there's that false drop. And, you know, to make this false drop even more interesting, what I'll do is I'll do a, put the snare right here. So the snare is going to tell the listener, like, okay, here's the drums. Right back into it. Now, vocals is definitely something that would bring this track to the next level. And, you know, what I would recommend is there's so many vocalists out there. You can browse on SoundCloud. You know, there's so many talented people trying to do some work. They're trying to get involved. And if you're making a good track, instead of just jumping to a sample, there's nothing wrong with that. You can easily just grab a vocal sample from Splice or Loopcloud like I showed you. But if you were to work with an original vocalist and allow them to be creative on the track, you could really get something amazing. So yeah, you know, just to kind of give a recap on what's going on, you know, then I would create an outro here. Just go here. I hope you got something out of this track breakdown, and thank you so much for being here. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and take care. Peace.
Hi, I'm Icicle, and welcome to my studio. I'm a drum and bass producer from Holland, if you didn't know. I used to live in England for a long time, and together with Drum and Bass Academy, I have made a course describing my entire process. It's an Ableton course over 4 hours long, in which I go through drum design, drum programming, sound design, bass lines, composition and arrangement, some advanced sound design techniques as well, and mastering. Included are the project files as well, samples, presets, everything, so you can properly follow along with me and get to the same result as myself. So I hope you enjoy.